I am an advocate, a very strong advocate, of following very strictly the rule of law, the Constitution of the United States.
I have followed certain principles that I believe that I am obligated to remain consistent to. Fortunately, those principles that I have developed are consistent, I believe, very sincerely, with the Constitution. And the Constitution and the founders of this country really believed in limited federal government. They allowed options for the states, but it was to be very, very limited. In this century, I think we have gone a long way to drift away from these principles of limitation of government power. I believe it's a moral issue more than anything else.
For some, patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. For others, it means dissent against a government's abuse of the people's rights.
Never tax the internet and never regulate the internet.
I am absolutely opposed to a national ID card. This is a total contradiction of what a free society is all about. The purpose of government is to protect the secrecy and the privacy of all individuals, not the secrecy of government. We don't need a national ID card.
The original American patriots were those individuals brave enough to resist with force the oppressive power of King George. I accept the definition of patriotism as that effort to resist oppressive state power. The true patriot is motivated by a sense of responsibility and out of self-interest for himself, his family, and the future of his country to resist government abuse of power.
It's not whether we endorse bad habits or good habits. We endorse freedom.
I would work very hard to protect the privacy of American citizens, being very, very cautious about warrantless searches, and I would guarantee that I would never abuse habeas corpus.
The founders were very well educated, and they came to the conclusion that individual rights were very important. And they talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and they believed in property rights. And I'm a strong believer in that. And I believe in natural rights. I believe in God-given rights. I don't believe any rights come to us from our government. Governments are designed, and the purpose is to be very limited to protect those rights so that individuals don't take them from us with the use of force. It's very easy to accept the principle, don't use force on other people.
I am an advocate, a very strong advocate, of following very strictly the rule of law, the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution was written very precisely to restrain the power and force of government and to protect the liberties of each and every one of us.
I want to restore the original intent of the Constitution, which maximizes individual liberty and restrains the government from doing the things that they shouldn't be doing.
We have a very unfair tax system. We need a fair tax system. That means getting rid of the IRS and repealing the 16th Amendment.
If you were president, would you work to phase out the IRS?
Immediately.
That's what they call a softball.
And you can only do that if you change our ideas about what the role of government ought to be. If you think the government has to take care of us from cradle to grave, and if you think our government should police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars on a foreign policy that we cannot manage, you can't get rid of the IRS. But if you want to lower taxes, and if you want the government to quit printing the money to come up with shortfall and cause all the inflation, you have to change policy.
Freedom means self-responsibility and self-reliance. It also means you get to keep the fruits of your labor.
I want to get rid of the IRS, I want to get rid of the income tax, but I want to reduce the size and scope of government to the point where we don't need the income tax. We didn't have an income tax up until 1913, and we did quite well.
But since we've had the income tax, government has grown by leaps and bounds, and it has allowed our government to get involved in things that they shouldn't be involved, policing our personal habits, policing the economy, and policing the world. If you don't want the government to do that, you don't need the income tax. So a lot of people ask me, what am I going to replace it with? I don't want to replace it with anything. I want to reduce it. But the responsible question is that, what are you going to do about all the spending? And my answer is we should cut the spending.
We have allowed our nation to be overtaxed and overregulated and overrun by bureaucrats. The founders would be ashamed of us for what we're putting up with. Our campaign is all about freedom, prosperity, and peace.
Paul, how much longer should the United States stay in Iraq?
The sooner we come home, the better. If they declare there's no progress in September, we should come home. It was a mistake to go, so it's a mistake to stay. If we made the wrong diagnosis, we should change the treatment. So we're not making progress there, and we should come home. The weapons weren't there, and we went in under UN resolutions, and our national security was not threatened. We're more threatened now by staying.
I tried very hard to solve this problem before we went to war by saying, declare war if you want to go to war, fight it and win it, but don't get into it for political reasons or to enforce UN resolutions or pretend the Iraqis were a national threat to us.
We have a lot of goodness in this country, and we should promote it, but never through the barrel of a gun. We should do it by setting good standards, motivating people, and have them want to emulate us. But you can't enforce our goodness like the neocons preach with an armed force. It doesn't work.
The people who say there will be a bloodbath are the ones who said it would be a cakewalk, it would be a slam dunk, and that it would be paid for by oil. Why believe them? They've been wrong on everything they've said. So why not ask the people? Why not ask the people who advise not to go into the region and into the war? It's the policy that is wrong. Tactical movements and shifting troops around and taking in 30 more and reducing by 5, totally irrelevant. We need a new foreign policy that said we ought to mind our own business, bring our troops home, defend this country, defend our borders.
You're basically saying that we should take our marching orders from Al-Qaeda. If they want us off the Arabian Peninsula, we should leave?
No. I'm saying we should take our marching orders from our Constitution. We should not go to war. We should not go to war without a declaration.
Tonight, we hear that we're not even willing to remove from the table a preemptive nuclear strike against the country that has done no harm to us directly and is no threat to our national security. I mean, we have to come to our senses about this issue of war and preemption and go back to traditions and our Constitution and defend our liberties and defend our rights, but not to think that we can change the world by force of arms and to start war.
I believe that when we overdo our military aggressiveness, what it does, it actually weakens our national defense. I mean, we stood up to the Soviets. They had 40,000 nuclear weapons. Now we're fretting day in and day night about third world countries that have no army, navy, or air force, and we're getting ready to go to war. But the principle, the moral principle, is that of defending liberty and minimizing the scope of government.
But there are a few very, very important responsibilities of the federal government. One is to provide for a strong national defense. A strong national defense means that we have an understanding of national sovereignty. That is slipping away from us today. The neoconservatives have taken over for the traditional conservatives, and they do not have the respect for our national borders that they should. We do not any longer have national sovereignty. We have referred too much to the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO, the NAFTA and the CAFTA agreements, and they should not be part of our system.
There's every reason in the world to be optimistic, realizing that the problems exist and we can deal with them. But it is not that complicated. Almost every problem that we face today is the fact that we didn't take the good advice that we had from the founders and that we don't follow the rule of law. If we would say, what is the problem, whether it's a monetary problem or a tax problem or a free market problem or whatever, and say, well, let's look at the advice that we were given. Maybe we can correct things. We could revive the true spirit of America. We could make sure that our wealth is not borrowed and that we can become wealthier and more generous than ever before.
Matter of fact, if you look at every single problem we're facing today, it's because of the lack of respect for the rule of law and the Constitution. The answers can be found in the return to the rule of law and a strict interpretation of the Constitution.